Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm going to be talking about my top podcasts. Oh my god, finger guns, really? What are you, Tim Stoker? Ha! I wish. The first podcast is the Rewatchables. If you ever want to listen to pretentious film lovers analyze a movie, this is the podcast you want. The show host is Bill Simmons, who is the CEO and founder of a website called The Ringer, which is a sports and pop culture focused website. As I said, this is a pretentious film discussion, so sometimes they say things and terms that they just expect the audience to know, and sometimes they will break down whatever the fuck they're saying. But sometimes they don't, and I have to pause and Google it because I don't understand what they're talking about. As pretentious and annoying as film lovers are, you gain so much knowledge and hear some really great critical dialogue, and you start to absorb their intellect. But sometimes, they have really generic conversations. I guess it just really depends on the movie. It's best listened to if it's a movie that you've already seen. You can definitely listen to critiques of things that you haven't seen before, and that goes for any review podcast. But it just feels more engaging if it's something you know. I've learned a lot from them, like what to look out for when I'm watching movies. In the Mad Max Fury Road review that they had, they pointed out how Tom Hardy's audio sounded weird at certain points, and it wasn't stated as fact, but how the audio sounded like a voiceover. And there are different reasons as to why you would do that, but they were just talking about how odd and out of place it sounded, and I was like, oh my god, they're right. And surprisingly, I've been able to identify when it happens in TV shows and movies, and that's not really something I would have been consciously looking for, or subconsciously, because sometimes I just notice it. But yeah, now it's obvious because they pointed it out. It's just such eye-opening conversations that really broaden my thinking when I'm watching films. Did I talk about the podcast enough? I'm not sure, but it's one of my favorites, so hopefully that means something. Script Notes is the next podcast. I owe this podcast so much. Script Notes is very academic focused and talks about the writing process for TV shows and movies. The podcast is hosted by Craig Mazin and John August, who are both screenwriters and pretty successful screenwriters in Hollywood. Craig Mazin is so funny to me because this bitch went to Princeton and his roommate was Republican Senator Ted Cruz, and he just publicly makes fun of Ted Cruz on Twitter with the knowledge that he has from their college days, and I think that's really fucking funny. Just, random information that I find hilarious. Craig Mazin, screenwriter, most recently known for being the showrunner for the HBO miniseries Chernobyl, which is a really great show. I ranked it #1 on my list of TV shows I watched in 2019. And also, Craig Mazin is going to be the screenwriter for the HBO series for The Last of Us. Craig has played the game himself when it released, and it's funny because he has to work with the creator for The Last of Us, Neil Druckmann, who is problematic on so many different levels, and I am pretty sure Craig Mazin does not like him. Well, okay. He said, and I quote, "I would never be able to get within 100 yards of Neil Druckmann without, I don't know, a restraining order." And I was like, Craig, what the fuck am I supposed to do with this information? John August most recently worked as the screenwriter for the live-action Aladdin movie. Not a lot that I can say about his work. I feel neutral about his work as a screenwriter, which is, I'm sorry, I know I'm totally downplaying him, but I'm just more familiar with Craig Mazin's work. Still a very brilliant mind to listen to in this podcast. These are really privileged cishet white men, and I want to be clear about that. But just from their thoughts and dialogue, I think that they are quite progressive, and they seem very aware of the racist and classist and sexist structures within the entertainment industry. I agree with their stances on police and incarceration and mental illness and disabilities, because that's topics that they've talked about in the show, and maybe the MCU, which is totally not on the same level, but I just wanted to bring that up. The MCU and, companies in general because they were talking about how as screenwriters, how the entertainment industry has changed and limited them because of... Anyways, it's not relevant. It's not relevant at all. But I just wanted to bring it up because I'm petty like that. Anyway, what I was trying to say is that I'm not saying that I trust them, and I'm not saying that I'm like a dedicated Stanny or something like that. I think they just offer a lot of knowledge to us as people who do not have the resources that they do. This podcast is perfect for people who are interested in being screenwriters or are just interested in knowing about the screenwriting process. So they talk about general writing tips, writing action, writing villains, writing heroes, visual language, common obstacles writers experience pertaining to specific stuff. I can't think of a word. They've had directors and screenwriters guest on episodes. They answer questions from fans too, so a lot of those questions are like very specific to the screenwriting process, and I love hearing those questions and seeing their answers. It's very academic dialogue, but it's also casual at the same time. And not all of their episodes are not like the technical stuff about writing. One of my favorite parts of this podcast are the panel episodes, and I love those so much because they always get such a good, diverse group of people to speak at their panel. For example, there was one panel about the criminal justice system and incarceration. They had guests who were experts on the criminal justice system, and someone who was personally incarcerated, and someone who was a screenwriter for this TV show about someone who was incarcerated, and a director who spent years filming a documentary on someone who was incarcerated in their early teenage years and following them until their adulthood. So, you know, you get an expert, you get personal experience, you get a director, you get a writer, and so it becomes a perfect mix of different perspectives and knowledge. The issue with script notes is that episodes are free for a limited amount of time. So say there's a 20 episode cap, right? If they release a new episode, then the oldest one will be put into their archive and it will no longer be available for free. So if you ever see them release an episode that really interests you, you need to listen to it like immediately or whatever. You have like a few months to listen to it before they get rid of it. I pay for their episodes because I think they're fucking worth it. This isn't them being, you know, money hungry hacks or anything like that. They don't do paid sponsorships, so subscriptions and merchandise is literally how they're getting paid for this. I think I talked too much about script notes. I didn't talk enough about the Rewatchables and talk too much about script notes. It's like, come on, man. Next is My Brother, and Me, a comedy podcast by the Mcelroys, the only cis-het white men I genuinely trust. They're such kind people, and they've become such great LGBTQ plus allies. And they always own up to their mistakes, and they genuinely try to do better. And they're just like, yes. I think we, as a society, need to stop putting celebrities on a pedestal because, you know, we don't really know much about them, and sometimes they're like, their morals are very questionable. But the Mcelroys, I genuinely trust them. Like, I really do. For example, in their D&D podcast, The Adventure Zone. Okay, I'm totally going off track right now, but let me just say this. In The Adventure Zone, they had a queer couple, and they followed the bury your queers trope, and that was received with a lot of backlash. And then they publicly acknowledged that they were not aware that this was a trope, and that they were going to try to do better. And they did that by creating a shit ton of queer characters who were happy and in relationships and did not die in the end. They've done so much other stuff by like donating money and publicly acknowledging mistakes and harm that they've done to communities, and, you know, just owning up to the mistakes. I feel like not a lot of celebrities do that. They're like the fucking Rick Riordan of the podcasting industry. But, you know, going back to podcasts, the Mcelroy family is a family of podcasters. They have 13 podcasts, I think. But My Brother, and Me is the brothers' first podcast, and I'm going to be talking about that one. It's also called MBMBAM, also referred to as Mabim Bam, Mabim Bam. I don't know how MBM sounds. Mabim Bam. Like, I get the bam. Mabim. Anyway, fucking stupid. My Brother and Me is an advice show. And it has been running for over 10 years. The hosts are Justin, Griffin, and Travis, all brothers. It's not really an advice show. People send in questions from Yahoo Answers, or they send in personal questions, and then the McElroys read it and then make fun of it. They make it into like a comedic bit. Fair warning of swearing, and also they can be a little like weird. They have like weird silly jokes that I prefer to keep away from the ears of some people, because I just feel like, you know, some people don't have the same humor as you sometimes, and so when they don't, you kind of just like don't want them to hear that stuff, because then they're gonna think you're weird. They're funny though, like, I don't know, whatever. If people don't think it's funny, it's fine. Also, I feel like I have to warn you guys about this, but there are 12 reoccurring segments in Mabim Bam from Travis and Justin, such as the Haunted Doll Watch, Riddle Me Piss, and Minion quotes. But the one that I absolutely have to warn you about is Munch Squad. When I first started listening to this podcast, I wasn't really a big fan of the McElroys yet, so I wasn't really familiar with their behavior in comedy yet. And the intro for Munch Squad, sometimes it's just really weird, like really weird. And as someone who wasn't familiar with, you know, their comedy yet, it was very awkward to listen to, like really bad secondhand embarrassment. But Munch Squad is a really fantastic segment, and it's the most reoccurring one. They just read like really ridiculous food advertisements. My favorite segment is the Haunted Doll Watch, which is when they look for haunted doll listings on eBay with really stupid, ridiculous item descriptions, and they read it out for you and they make fun of it, and I think it's really funny. So they got like over 500 episodes now, which is a lot and overwhelming, I know. I highly recommend listening to the most recent one and then just working your way down from there. I don't have much to say other than it's a really funny podcast, and I have so much love for the McElroy family, and I really think they're beautiful people and such loving people, and they are the family that you see in movies and wish that was your family. Next is the Magnus Archives. Considering that fictional podcasts are my favorite ones to listen to, it's really weird how this is the only one that's made it to my favorites list. The Magnus Archives is a fiction horror podcast about these people who work in this institution doing research on spooky stuff. And Jonathan Sims, the main character, is a firm non-believer despite everything that life throws at him. That stupid man. First of all, yes, this is technically an anthology, and it's going to seem like it's only an anthology for a couple of episodes, but I promise you there's more. I'm personally not a fan of anthologies, so when I first started listening to this podcast, I was very turned off by the idea of listening to another horror anthology podcast. Man, if only someone had told me that there was an actual plot in this podcast, I would have been listening to this podcast for 3 years already. But, you know, luckily, I had a mutual on Twitter who started talking about this podcast, and I was like, yo, what is this? And then I realized, oh my fucking god, this is not an anthology podcast, and I've been wrong this whole time. Yeah, I revisited it, and turns out it's a really good fucking podcast. The Magnus Archives is gothic horror, which I did not understand what gothic horror was until this podcast, and honestly, I'm still not good at defining gothic horror, but this is one of them. This is it. Hold on. My friend Andrea defined gothic horror for me, and I'm going to read that really quick. Instead of utilizing lots of gore and a much more modern, straightforward writing approach, gothic horror concerns itself more with emotions, symbolism, and setting a creepy ambience. So that is what gothic horror is. Obviously, I can't say too much about this podcast because of spoilers, but things are connected and there's a huge plot, and the pacing is fantastic. I love the horror, and I have so much respect for Jonathan Sims, who is the writer and plays the main character in this podcast. Like, I have a list of creators, right? In my head, I have a very short list of creators that I truly admire, because I think these people are really creative and really understand good storytelling, and Jonathan Sims is on that list. Imagine Guillermo del Toro, Alex Hirsch, David Fincher, Zack Snyder next to Jonathan Sims. I hope that gives you a sense of how much I praise and respect Jonathan Sims and the Magnus Archives. I want to clear things up a bit. Jonathan Sims is the writer and actor, and he also used his real name for his character, which is so stupid on his part, and he knows that and he admits that now, but just so stupid, and I just want to clear up any confusion that you will have. Second, absolutely do not look up information on this podcast. If you are confused, do not look up information. Swear to God, I promise your brain will figure it out as you go. Looking up information, no matter how small you think it is, it's going to spoil you. I don't care if you're looking up someone's name or whatever the fuck. Just do not Google anything. Don't do it. Don't Google and don't look for fan art. Like, avoid the fucking fan base, because that shit's gonna spoil you too. There are trigger warnings and transcripts for each episode. If you Google the Magnus Archives transcript, like, the first thing that will pop up will be a link to all the transcripts for it. The trigger warnings are also listed on these transcripts. But if you would like a, one collective list for the trigger warnings, if you Google the Magnus Archives trigger warnings, I think the first thing that pops up is like a Reddit post, which then links to a Google document with all the trigger warnings on there. And there's no spoilers on that trigger list. There is no animal abuse and no animal deaths in this podcast. That is something Jonathan Sims makes explicitly clear. But there are a shit ton of very triggering content. So, just skim through the triggers just to see what kind of content you're getting yourself into. There's also a shit ton of representation in the show. Jonathan Sims is bisexual and asexual. Martin Blackwood is queer. Hi, editing me. I mispronounced something, so I'm going to re-record it. Basir Hussan is Muslim and queer. Daisy Tonner? Daisy Tonner? I've never said the last name, but Daisy is also queer. Georgie Barker is either pan or bi, not sure which label. Melanie King, also queer. Tim Stoker, bisexual. Tim Stoker, deep voice, literally called the hot one. Oh my god. Tim Stoker. I love Tim Stoker, and I'm gonna move on. Yes, I'm not lying to you. This is all canon representation. It's like offhandedly mentioned in conversations with people, or it's like confirmed through like relationships that they've had in the past or get into. So very queer TV show, very queer podcast. So that's all I have to say about that. Words cannot describe the amount of love and praise I want to give this show. Just trust me, this is a really good podcast. Do I still have time? I've talked for over an hour, but once it's edited, maybe it's not too much. There's one podcast that I want to mention. It's technically a favorite. Like, I admire it a lot, but it's also not like a recommendation. Like, I don't know, I'm very on the fence about this because I don't know if I should talk about it or not. But I'll just mention it, I guess. So there's been a trend of companies putting out behind the scenes podcasts for TV shows and movies where there's a consistent host for every episode, and each episode guest stars a director or writer or actor, producer, whatever. There's the A24 podcast, there's the Netflix podcast, I think it's called Behind the Scenes. There's a Good Place podcast. There's like 5 HBO podcasts, but the one that really stands out the most for its deep, intellectually stimulating conversations is the Watchman Podcast. And I mean, obviously it was going to be deep conversations, considering it's fucking Watchmen, of course. I'm a huge Watchmen fan. I love it. If you don't know anything about Watchmen, so you can either read the comic or watch the movie, and then watch the TV show, and then listen to the podcast. The original comic is by Alan Moore, but it's very dense, which makes it very difficult to read through. So if you don't want to read the comic, you can watch the 2009 movie directed by Zack Snyder. I recommend watching the director's cut, which is 3 hours long, but it's a Zack Snyder film, and you know, he always makes 3-hour movies, and they're really, really good. I think it's a super fast-paced movie, so it won't feel like 3 hours, but definitely sitting down for a long time is gonna tire your body, so you know, take breaks. The only thing is that the ending is different. Well, the ending is the same, but the method to get that ending is different, and so after watching the movie, you should Google what the differences are. And then after that, you can watch the HBO TV series, and then you can watch the podcast. Watch, listen. As of today, there's only 5 episodes for this podcast, which is not a lot, and I don't expect there to be more. The first 3 eps are breakdowns for each episode. So episode 1 of the podcast talks about Watchmen episode 1 to 3, and then episode 2 of the podcast is 4 to 6, and then episode 3 is 7 to 9. In those episodes, Craig Mazin has discussions with the showrunner, Damon Lindelof, and the showrunner is basically someone who has like creative authority for everything. The last 2 eps are with some of the directors and writers of the show. They talk about racism, generational trauma, the writer's room, how to bring up sensitive topics and handle it in a sensitive and respectful way, how they came up with what they did, etc. And I just think these people did such a fucking fantastic job on this TV show, and just listening to them talk, it's fantastic. There's not much I can say about this podcast because it's obviously very focused to a specific group of people. If you want to know more about the Watchmen TV show, then I highly recommend this podcast because it's fucking amazing. Also, Damon Lindelof, I mean, okay, let me be a petty little comic book fan for a quick minute, okay? Damon Lindelof says that he only likes some of the DCEU movies, and he likes most of the MCU movies. And that makes me question Damon Lindelof a bit as like a screenwriter. You know, it's not important, but I just wanted to bring that up. That's not one of the main takeaways from these episodes, but Damon, what the fuck? Watchmen is leading the Emmys this year with 26 fucking nominations. DC Nation, baby. Ooh, DC is just dominating. First it was Joker, now it's fucking this. Good for us. Yeah, good job, DC. I love us. Well, that was it. These are my top podcasts. They're very white. This is a very white-dominated industry. Please drop any podcast recommendations in the comments section because I love listening to new podcasts. I do it all the time. I just like lying in bed and just like scrolling through Spotify looking for new things to listen to. Especially if you have any fictional podcasts. I would love to find more. I love fictional podcasts. I need to like make an episode on like the ones that I'm listening to right now. One thing at a time though. Thank you for watching this video. I will see you next time. Oh god, not the finger guns again.